We can get really different even down to our fingerprints. No two things are alike. Causation is about a universal law to actually keep happening. Therefore, it's really hard to replicate even one instance. So nothing actually happens again. How has one of the most popular academic and atheists actually made an argument for God? Unwillingly. Made a very decisive argument for God. See, in modern science, knowing how one thing causes the other thing to happen, it seems to be always statistical. It's always got this percentage baked into it. You can't really know 100% whenever something caused the other thing. When you plant a seed, it should grow a tree, an apple tree for example. But that's not always the case, and there are reasons for that. This could be quite as well an argument for like how modern science proves God. And you'll get a part of why this is later in this video. There's a distinction, of course, between like singular causal effects and like causal laws. There is a difference. But generally, Bertrand Russell, in his 1913 paper on causation, kind of made an argument against causation. Now, Bertrand Russell does believe in causation. Now, he actually came around to actually affirming it, like in his 1948 book, Human Knowledge, saying that it's actually true. Itself, common sense with laws gave you causation. You can actually talk about that. So you can actually prove it. But he had a very decisive claim against all the others, an extremely severe attack on the notions, traditional notions of causation, even deterministic ones. You know, the guys with, like, today's maybe biologists, neuroscientists, and physicists that tell you everything is determined. And the argument about free will. We're going to talk about free will and causation in other videos with Sapolsky and others, so stay tuned to that. That could be a very decisive argument against it. You see, I do believe in causal determinism, but I'm very specific in what I believe in, and it's not in any way, shape, or form the same way these people believe in. As Muslims, we can take on board the Russellian attack in a way, because it's against the definition. We can talk philosophically about causation and get into the details, but let's just give the general conclusion of this. So, Bertrand Russell gives this argument, in short, that causation or causality could be very general or very precise. And these are two problems that you're always going to face trying to identify a cause and effect. So if you give money to the poor, or if you want to drink coffee, there are a whole lot of systems that work in order for you to do that, right? So statistically, it's really impossible to actually know when that's going to happen. And is that going to happen always? In the sense, if you have finite spaces of time, there's always a chance between planting that seed and for that tree to grow is to not have enough sunlight, for example. Because it's not only about the seed, is it? Right? There's a whole lot of factors that get into it as well. But he basically says there's always this chance of something happening that won't let the effect actually follow from the cause. Even when we speak, I'm speaking right now, the whole system is actually working in a way for me to produce sound that you can hear. But imagine if there's no air, i.e. no medium, sound waves won't travel to your ears. You won't hear me. So there needs to be air as well. And nothing actually comes alone. A quick example from your probability class. The more data points you have, the less probable this eventual conclusion will happen. So if you flip heads one time, it's heads or tails. Half. If you flip it 2 times, then having a heads is 1 out of 4 options actually, instead of 1 out of 2. It becomes less probable every time you do it. So that's a very important point to keep note there. Now just to give an example of this general and precise, so if you say all human beings eat, it's relatively really close to be true, right? But if you say John and Alice and Rachel and Bob, if you get very specific on which human being actually ate what, the more specific you get, it becomes really hard to define whether they actually ate or not. We can get really different even down to our fingerprints. No two things are alike. And if that's the case, then causation is about a universal law to actually keep happening. Therefore, it's really hard to replicate even one instance of that. John eating today and John eating a year later is it's almost different of a system actually. Cells is changed, the time is different, so nothing actually happens again. Generally, that's the argument. If you want to talk about conceptually about law and causation and all that stuff, that's the argument that you make. And it is kind of true. Okay, but where's the link then? How does this prove God? Well, 2 points. First of all, causation is about something producing other things, something that can cause another thing to happen, which is the effect, i.e. can bring it into being. Second of all, it's a logical relation. So an apple tree produces apples. If there's no apples, then there was no apple tree. So there's a logical relation there. Now, you might mix it up a bit with epistemology about how you know, right? Does apples only grow from apple trees? That's something you discover, through investigation, through scientific investigation. But the principles, the idea of causation itself, something bringing the other thing to happen, and the logical relation between the two, that's steady. And if the whole universe is an effect, which is supposedly is by previous events, the definition of determinism, the definition of causation should be something preceding the other thing to bring it into being. So the universe, in one sense, is an effect of the previous moment, is the effect of the previous cause. And just to preface that, believing in God is one of the most simple, obvious truths. We're delving into this because there's a lot of pseudo-philosophical, pseudo-scientific arguments that have been presented to prevent this obviously true answer to be there, But some people need stepping stones, and hopefully this is one way to do this. The second thing is, things come in tandem, don't they? You see, in order for fire to burn, you need paper to be presented in the fire, and you need oxygen for the combustion to keep on happening, actually. So if there were no oxygen, and there was no paper to be burnt, then it burnt nothing, really. It burnt other things, but not the paper. Or apple, again, with the seed and the tree. If there's no soil, if there's no sunlight, then there's no tree, even if you have the seed. But seeds do have the capacity to produce a tree, but it needs other things in tandem. And if that's the case, then it will always be, you need to have something that can actually bring everything into being with its own capacity. It doesn't need anything else. Well, that's a logical conclusion. It just works. It's a regular logical conclusion. If you want to add to this more, there's actually a Russellian argument. Bertrand Russell again, he gives more like a mathematical function type of argument to this. Variables, x plus y equals 2. By definition, they're infinite. You can replace the x value with an infinite number of things. Infinities are impossible. And that would be a contradiction because it's an infinite thing and at the same time it's one thing. But you can have many things. And this is something of an investigation process that you do try to find out. Therefore, it's the seed and the sunlight that produces that apple tree. But again, the logical relation still remains. And if you have infinities of that, things cannot go out to infinity. You just can't. It's just a logical contradiction because you have one thing and you can't have one thing and an infinite at the same time, at the same moment. You can't have one thing with an infinite option of it being one at the same time. No. So it's like a different argument. But again, I'm just talking about causation. And you cannot have causation without something that has the capacity to bring everything into existence, because everything else is a contradiction to it. Hit the like, subscribe, and see you later.